pulled together today is some food for thought for you all around why women in politics matters a lot. And I think to begin, the most natural place when we think about South Carolina politics is I'm going to take you to the depths of the ocean in the South Pacific. So why would I do this? I think, what do we have here? What are we looking at? We'll get some audience participation since we're a small, cozy group. Coral, right, a coral reef. A very healthy coral reef. What scientists are looking at is the power of diversity as an indicator of health in ecosystems. And coral reefs are some of the most diverse that you can find in this world. And in my work in Edible Upcountry magazine, there's a lot of discussion around soil health and soil diversity. And basically everywhere where there is soil that is teeming with life, teeming with a real diverse ecosystem, it's healthier, it's more productive, it's more resilient. So I'd like us to think on that when it comes to perhaps diversity of thought and diversity in organizations and diversity in leadership. And let's talk about an ecosystem where perhaps, in diversity of leadership, it's been pretty healthy. Let's think about our beloved city here. It's certainly not perfect. We're certainly thinking hard about a lot of issues these days as it grows very rapidly. But by and large, I think we can all recognize Greenville is kind of a shining star and has been for a while. In particular, over the last 20 years has been this era of unbelievable accomplishment and recognition, and yeah, that Greenville. It wasn't called Yeah, That Greenville when I got here 20 years ago, but it sure is today. I mean, the accolades and the awards that keep coming in are really amazing. They're tremendous. And so when you think about who's been in charge, who's been running the show, who's been sitting around the decision-making table representing us for the last 20 years. What we have is a city council that has a mayor and 6 elected officials. So at any given point, there are 7 people sitting around that table, that governing table for our fair city, right? So 20 years ago, from 97 to 99, and they sort of monitor it in 2-year increments, there were 5 men and 2 women seated at that table. So women represented 29%, right, of the brain power of governing in Greenville. In 1999 to 2001, it began to shift a little bit, and there was another woman elected, and so there were 4 men, 3 women. And then for the better part of the run of the last 20 years, it's been well over half women seated at that table. There was a defining moment in 2001 and a very long stretch leading up to this past cycle where Greenville has had a majority of women seated at our decision-making table. That's going to change this coming cycle. And I hope everybody, I don't give anybody the impression that I don't like anybody seated around that table. It's just we're seeing who's been there, right, from a gender point of view. All right, so let's talk about a different example. Well, excuse me. So the average photo op over the last 20 years at Greenville City Council, hanging on the walls of City Hall, looked like this. This was our leadership in 2005 to 2007. This is sort of an example of what that body looked like more oftentimes than not over the last 20 years. I'd also like to mention the council members. Greenville is one of the few places where elections are partisan. Municipal elections are partisan. Most municipal elections in the state are nonpartisan, but Greenville is partisan. And I'd actually like to call out that it's half and half in this group. of council representatives, which is perhaps another conversation another day, but it is half Republican, half Democrat in its collection of brains. So a different example could perhaps be our statehouse. Bye, Russell. Good luck. You know, this is a place where people love to talk about the federal government because it's big and gnarly and lots going on, right? The statehouse, let's think about the decisions that are being made there, right? When it comes to infrastructure and education and health and really so many of the things that touch us every single day. Let's think about the ecosystem of ideas down in Columbia. So this is the current state of the state in our legislature. We live in a state with 51% women. We're actually more than half of citizens in the state. And this is our current legislative body that is representing us. So in the House, it's 16%. In the Senate, it's 9%. Collectively, it's not quite 14%. Let's just call it 14%. 14% women representing us down in Columbia. The national average at a state legislator level is 25%. So just a little point of reference there. Those are kind of just where we are, right? Just facts. This is who's at the table. What I'd like to do right now is just give you, maybe these are the ideas we're spreading, I'm not sure. But 3 considerations, all right? And how about we call them thusly? On the left, we have brain science. In the middle, we'll call it research. And on the right, we'll call it potential. So 3 sort of meditations, if you will, on perhaps why having more women involved in politics is important. So when it comes to brain science, let me ask, since we're a small group here, who here has heard of something called the nothing box? Yes, my family over there. That's good. Okay. What I want to talk about is a somewhat, I thought it was fairly infamous, a YouTube video from actually pastor out of Wisconsin, who's also a widespread, fairly well-known sort of marriage expert. He travels around and is a marriage expert and gives lots of advice on marriage. His name's Mark Gungar. And he has described what resonates for a lot of people as a fundamental difference in the way men's brains work and the way women's brains work. So as he describes in his video, and I encourage you all to look at it online, he describes men's brains as associated with boxes. There's a box for our relationship, dear wife. There's a box for work. There's a box for church or social activities. There's a box for the car. There's a box for yard work. And when I'm working on any one of these given boxes, I like to pull out the box. I like to work on it. I don't like the boxes to touch each other. And then I'm going to put the box back. When Mark talks about women's brains, he likens it to a tangled ball of wire, where every single thing is connected. The car is connected to the kids, to the checkbook, to the weather, to everything. It is impossible to separate out issues of home life. What I would like to read you is something that made me laugh anyway, written recently by a woman named Lisa Black, who's a celebrated journalist with the Chicago Tribune. And she was talking about this very topic and had done some of her own research. And she describes a scenario, and it goes like this. When considering a much-needed house project, a new floor, I simply can't focus on the floor alone. My mind insists on throwing in extraneous criticism about the need for new kitchen cabinets and countertops and carpet for that matter, and the fact that the sink leaks and there's no disposal and the leftovers in the refrigerator need to be thrown out, and how come no one bothered to feed the dogs today? Which sends me to thinking about the elder dog's arthritis and how he won't use the ramp I bought him. And maybe my mother could use the ramp, and maybe we need to forget the whole flooring idea because our dog's claws will destroy it anyway. And then I can't contemplate new flooring. All these other issues need to be resolved first. And it's an all or nothing proposition. The floor decision waits another day. Is this typical only of women, or do men think the same way? My husband can seriously consider replacing the floor, just the floor, he says, without plunging into a vortex of internal drama. We laugh, and that's good. How many of you here let's see, how many here are over 18? Okay. How many of you have been in a romantic relationship for more than a day? And how many of you would argue that women and men's brains operate a little differently? Yeah, neither good nor bad, right? It's just there's some differences there. So let's think about, what I'd like to say is a colleague of mine in this new organization I'm involved in, she's very involved down in Columbia, meets a lot of different politicians, and her comment to me recently was what she sees with women politicians is they ask the next question. So what I would like for you all to think about is what does our society, our governing complexity look like? Might a ball of wire perhaps be a bit useful in that mix? Like, how does poverty relate to education, right? How does race relate to security, right? How does business climate relate to environment? The connections are impossible to not get away from. So perhaps a ball of wire way of thinking might be a nice piece in our mix of thinking through problems. So, on to research. I don't think what I was just saying was speculation, but let's talk about a few sort of interesting things coming out in research these days. There's an increasing body of study that is linking the effectiveness of policy making to women and the style that women bring to office, which is pretty compelling. I think, I suspect we're all people here that watch the news, I'm guessing, or plug into the news in some way. So there's been a lot going on this year. And I think anecdotally, we can, no matter where you sit across the aisle, recognize some leadership and independent thought that we've seen out of Washington, particularly among Republican women senators recently, in the very important debate around the health care bill. How do we keep our country healthy, right? So this is a quote from Susan Collins, who is one of the two women that voted very independently in that thought process. This was actually something she said in 2011. The other senator was, who can remember her name? Murkowski from Alaska, correct? Yeah. So what we're seeing, this was just sort of anecdotal, but some of the most interesting studies coming out are showing how powerful minority party women legislators are. And this is, again, across the board. So there was a study done by 3 researchers. They looked at 140,000 public bills that were introduced between 1973 and 2008. And what happened to those bills, to what, it's quite a process to get a bill pushed through committee, out of committee, through the process of actually being voted on and passed. And so when we think about the word gridlock, I don't think anybody has many positive connotations around that term. We all want to see our government working, productive, coming up with solutions and actually getting things done, correct? So this is probably hard to kind of discern from where you're sitting. I think the main thing to see here is the green line. So what this is comparing to is the green line represents minority party women over that period of time, 73 to 2008. The main line is the point of reference against their male counterparts. And what you're seeing is because of their skill at compromise and working across the aisle, minority party women in particular were much more effective at getting legislation moving. So there's linking to, again, a style, an approach that women are bringing to office. They're more willing to work across the aisle, fundamentally. So the other thing I want to point out, and this was kind of my own research, I am not a scientist, I do like data. There is very detailed information on the percentage of women in state government out there, all right? And you can rank states top to bottom, to what degree, what percentage. Remember, South Carolina is 14%. We have 14% women in our state legislature. So I compared that against the study that just came out by Wallace Hub this year that was the ranking of best and worst states for women. So what might be the things that you look at for women in terms of best and worst states? We're talking about earning potential, you know, dollar for dollar against male counterparts in a state. We're talking about unemployment, female unemployment rate. We're talking about poverty rate, the percentage of women living in poverty, the percentage of women uninsured, the homicide rate of women. How safe or not, or economically viable or not, is it for a woman to live in any given state, all right? So when we look at that, the top 10 states, in terms of their representation in the state legislature, have an average rank of 16, meaning, you know, in that ranking of how good it is to live in your state. The top 10 states, their average rank was 16. The bottom 10 states, the average rank was 38. So my conclusion is, generally speaking, there is some kind of correlation between the more representation, the more female voices you have around a state's decision-making table, there seems to be a correlation to how safe and good and healthy and economically viable it is a climate for women in that state. And we're here. So, where do we go? So the third consideration, third and last, is what I call potential. So how many of you think back, raise your hand if your high school senior class president was a woman, a girl. Current. Can you remember? Okay. Raise your hand if it was a guy. Okay. Yeah. What we're seeing is there's no lack of potential in modern day high schools, right? In modern day middle schools. I'm staring at my high schooler age twin sons over there, and I know that they have a girl as a senior class president right now. These are images from this past year's National Association of Student Councils conference. And I don't expect you to like go person by person, but I can assure you that it was well over half girls in attendance at this. And you see this again and again. In middle school and high school, girls are leading. So they're ready to step up what's happening, right? What goes on there? Why does it start to look more like this, a little bit more like this in college, and a lot more like this after college? Sort of what's going on? We know for a fact that men and women get elected at the same rate. The problem is women aren't running for office. There's a void. They're not running. That is the main problem. So when we think about potential, we think about where we are, where we might be going. Greenville, Spartanburg area is the fastest growing region in the state. If you all have heard some of the news of late, Greenville, the city of Greenville is the fastest growing city in the southeast, fourth fastest growing city in the country. All right, we are in a booming, bustling time. These are our leaders at the county level. All right, on the left you have Greenville County, and on the right you have Spartanburg County. That's about 10% women at the table at a time when lots is happening, lots of growth is going on. And again, no one person doesn't need to be there. The point is, think about the ecosystem of ideas and where they're coming from in these fast changing times. And here we are in terms of who's representing us from a upstate delegation, if you will, down at the statehouse. We've got, we've got 19% of our representatives down in Columbia from the upstate are women, and we have no representation, no women representing us in Columbia in the Senate. So I think of that as a potential opportunity. I'm wondering who here might like to see this evolve a wee bit. Yeah, some hands raised. So, me too, of course. And when I think about potential, the image I thought I might put up here was, the faces of a bunch of girls, right? What is their future going to be? Where are they going? But the reality is, I'm raising men. I have twin sons that are in high school now, and this is about all of us. This is about our culture achieving its full potential. This is about the future for the granddaughters that they owe me, looking and feeling a lot more high functioning than perhaps it is today. This is as much for them as anything. If there are 51% women marching arm in arm as my children grow up and start to lead in our own community, everybody wins, right? This is about our whole culture and taking it in the right direction. Getting tactical, and I'm wrapping up here, if you feel motivated to get involved in getting more women to run for office, which I will be the first in my meshy, wired brain to say there's no one silver bullet to fix our community, I will say, let me get 51% of women in office, and then you can prove me wrong. Let us get there, and let's see how governance works. So if you're interested in getting involved, what I pulled together here is just a simple sort of view of some of the organizations across the board, across the political spectrum, working. Their entire mission, principally, is to get more women elected, or it's a significant piece of what they're doing. Get more women recruited and running for office and elected. So Emily's List, Emerge South Carolina, Run for Something on the left, if you're Democratic leaning. On the right, we have the National Federation of Republican Women. We have the Republican Majority for Choice. We have Maggie's List, which is effectively the counterpart to Emily's List. And then we have a host of nonpartisan organizations. You cannot be a 501c3 and be partisan. you are automatically in a different classification. So these are all organizations that are 501c3s that are working on behalf of trying to get more women across the board to run for office. So She Should Run, the Women's Campaign Fund, Running Start, Elect Her, Center for Women, which is an organization in Charleston, and they have a program called Pathway to Politics, and Higher Heights, which focuses more on women of color, and I believe they're out of Brooklyn. So there's lots of different ways to get involved. I've made my choice. I've jumped in to one, and I'm excited to see where our state can go at every level, municipal, county, state, and federal, of course. And I'd love to see some of you along the way in that path. So I'll leave this up for a little bit while longer, but thank you.